When I think of LA, I think about Kerouac's quote from On the Road. I could hear everything, together with the hum of my hotel neon. I never felt sadder in my life. LA is the loneliest and most brutal of American cities. New York gets god-awful cold in the winter, but there's a wacky feeling of comradeship somewhere in the streets. LA is a jungle. Los Angeles. Sun-drenched and filled with Chilean seabass-esque lip injections, I called this place home for almost 2 years. While it's undeniably one of the most filmed places on Earth, it's also the center of all things illusory. People come here with big dreams, and most leave or die here broken because LA is simply undefeated. That's what you don't see through the Hollywood lens projected to the outside world, the brokenness of Los Angeles. Before moving from Las Vegas in 2018, my native Angelino therapist told me that friends will not easily be found in LA. She said, "You could have what feels like the most in-depth conversation with people and then never see or hear from them again." And often this doesn't have to do with anything that was discussed, it's just how people interact in LA. Shallow, one-hit wonder talks, and you will only hear back when they feel like they can professionally or financially benefit from you or your perceived social capital. Fast forward into mid-2019, we were definitely over LA. It was then that my spouse Alex got a job offer that would move us to London. Having left a social work job by this time and working remotely from our home in West LA's Beverlywood neighborhood, I was eager to get the hell out of Los Angeles. Don't get me wrong, Los Angeles hasn't been entirely terrible. We lived in an area that was relatively safe, and we were within walking distance to shops, restaurants, and the famously price-gouged Rodeo Drive. However, while Alex was managing a hotel in Beverly Hills, I was working with homeless veteran outreach from Skid Row to Boyle Heights through Crenshaw, which led me to get acquainted with the uglier truths of this bizarre, brutal city. Commuting a mere few miles from work to home could be likened to going from wound botulism and bedbugs to McLarens and BMWs. Gradually, the door-to-door check-ins with veterans living in dilapidated apartments and impoverished neighborhoods started to have an all-too-familiar feel. It wasn't just the glaring income inequality, homelessness, and overall tension in the city. It personified the United States' problems like a third-world country in a Gucci belt. It alarmingly felt a lot like Iraq, except I wasn't armed or looking for weapons and explosives. Hell, even the outside view of our apartment adjacent to the opulent Beverly Hills city line looked like Iraq. Sandstone buildings peppered with satellite dishes and the tops of palm trees peeking through as my view after driving through narrow back alleys crossed with multiple and seemingly superfluous power lines. Forget the first Friday we spent in our new place, where Shabbat dinner songs reverberating through our apartment felt a lot like those Friday evening calls to prayer in Ramadi, Iraq. Los Angeles feels like a powder keg of anxiety, trauma, injustice, and a simmering unspoken hatred of segregated neighborhoods of one another. It's a city delicately dancing on eggshells just above a tar pit-lined fault line on stolen Tongva land. There are many ghosts here, and they're not quiet. There were definitely times when LA felt lonely, haunting, or even brutal, but it was also a mirror. Long story short, in spring 2019, after having a pretty shitastic experience of getting scammed by megalomaniacs in veteran clothing who claimed to be for the people, and turned out to be professional grifters exploiting other veterans, it was the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. That good old depression and PTSD had reached peak levels that were also reminiscent of Iraq War era feels. The effects of experiencing toxic leadership yet again wasn't anything I wanted to witness again, but Los Angeles was showing me parts of myself I needed to heal. After intense polytrauma therapy at the VA and getting to the roots of all the interwoven pain, I felt compelled to write and create again. The VA, after 13 years, was finally admitting my PTSD was in fact combat related. And yeah, depression seems like a logical response to over a decade of gaslighting and fuckery. I couldn't believe it. The tides were finally turning for me, both creatively and getting the treatment I needed. Late night chats about everything from war to all the travels between Alex and I would lead us to think that maybe we needed to record or document these stories. Alex, a former Italian Special Forces officer and Sarajevo veteran, and myself, a former Army NCO and Iraq War veteran, concluded that amid all the horrors that we both endured, we had far more interesting and hilarious stories to tell about our travels around the world. Those stories were a lot easier to see when the heavier ones were, at last, being recognized and validated by the very institutions who were supposed to be addressing it. As soon as Alex signed the contract on the new job in London, we were set to finally leave Los Angeles in March 2020. We've traveled throughout our lives, initially due to our parents' careers, then entered itinerant lives in the Army as teenagers. We continued moving throughout the world, never allowing enough time for roots to grow. That's where we found common ground. Travel helped us stay on our toes and kept things exciting. However, as we left Los Angeles a day earlier than anticipated due to COVID-19 travel restrictions starting between the US and Europe, this was obviously quite different. Travel pushes us to open our eyes to other ways of living, eating, working, and experiencing life in fresh new ways that launch us out of mundane comfort zones. With each new bite of new food, each new vista, each new person who lights your path, you remember the feeling of falling in love and what it means to feel alive. With experiences like ours in and out of war, it was important for us to remind ourselves of those feelings. In the philosophy of travel, George Santayana said that we need to escape into open solitudes, into aimlessness, into the moral holiday of running some pure hazard in order to sharpen the edge of life, to taste hardship, and to be compelled to work desperately for a moment at no matter what. LA did help us realize what seemed impossible. It helped me rediscover joy in everyday life, and it got my Italian spouse to openly admit to liking French cuisine. No, really. If you're in LA and don't mind waiting through sucktastic traffic through Pico Robertson, a food affair off of Robertson and Cassio is a goddamn gem. In the very last months of our stay in Los Angeles, the City of Angels managed to deliver quite a few spectacular miracles. As the wheels lifted on our airplane from LAX headed toward London Heathrow, I thought back on our time spent in this gritty yet glittery city. Los Angeles had its own cracks for sure, but it also highlighted the fissures in my own foundation, years of seismic trauma that hadn't been fully confronted until LA handed me the resources and opportunities to get shit done. In the latter half of 2019, I formed new bonds with people here and strengthened friendships that saved my life and sanity. Did we meet a lot of fake-ass people with fragile, ego-driven agendas? Did we get a lot of hipsters white-splaining Asian and Latin American cuisine to us against our will? Sure, but the impact of the real ones we had fortunately encountered had far outweighed the grief the grifters caused. While I often joke that LA is undefeated, living in the city has also gracefully reminded me that after multiple traumas and obstacles I've encountered throughout my life, so was I.